We're going to discuss here a letter that came out, Rav Kook's real opinion about attending the Temple Mount. It's well known that Rav Kook had signed on a Kol Koreh or Pashkeville public pronouncement back in the 20s, the mandatory era, prohibiting the Jews, or telling them, don't go to the Temple Mount. Now, unlike many things that Rav Kook has produced over the years, Rav Kook is known, his literature, his philosophical literature is kind of heavy reading. It's very hard to read. It's written in his own unique poetic Hebrew. So those are the most famous ones Deal wrote. And there's a whole bookshelf over there, Mosad Rav Kook books, wonderful books by Rav Kook, which are instant classics. And now we've begun translating them. Rav Kook was also a major posek. So let's say you open Shabbos Haaretz. So that's a halacha book. It reads differently than, for example, his philosophical works. And understandably, it's a halachic work. And it reads more of, let's say, the rest of the halacha corpus does. And it's accessible. So Rav Kook knew how to write halachically. When you read the Pashkevilles, like we said before, Pashkeville is not going to be a serious halachic treatment of the issue. It's more like where the rabbis trust us. And by the way, it is in their prerogative to make such a declaration. But if you want to actually analyze what is behind such a thing, you are not going to do that. You're not going to paskin by Pashkeville. You're not going to also learn to be a Jewish scholar by Pashkeville. But instead, what we're going to see here in front of us is Rav Kook's opinion, why it is he went about offering something. He went about prohibiting Jewish presence on the Temple Mount in his days specifically, with the full knowledge, by the way, that going to the Temple Mount is not only part of the Torah, it's an essential part of many of our basic commandments. The Jewish people cannot keep the Torah without going to the Temple Mount, just like pointed out within Maimonides' ways of counting the mitzvahs. It is assumed that the Jewish people live in the land of Israel. Why? Because the Jewish people cannot keep the Torah if they are not in the land of Israel. It's very simple. So why did Rav Kook prohibit this? It's not, once again, this is not going to be a halachic treatment. This is going to be a pragmatic consideration, what Rav Tendler called a political decision. Well, somebody would say in more gentle language, a public policy decision, okay? A tziburi decision. But either way, it is not a strictly halachic argument. So he says here, I'll read it over here. I'm sorry, I picked it up over here. Yeah, he's going to talk about over here. I didn't respond to your message. Okay. And I have what to say. Okay. I don't have much time to start explaining why it is not possible today, or Zmaninu, in any way to allow entrance to the place of the temple. I didn't send to this aforementioned author before. Okay? I only put little bits, very short messages. Nothing too deep here, no long explanations. And now, because of the political situation, and the danger to everybody, because our enemies are actually lying about us, they're libeling us, because what we're trying to do, we're trying to take from them with force the place of the Mikdash, because they've set up their mosque there in our sins. It means it's punishment, historical punishment of Jewish people, so that the temple is not the temple. And not only that, it's not just a barren place. There's actually a foreign worship there. God forbid. So presume to make any publication, okay, of any thought, any talking about this efforts by any people, lifnei galut or Hashem bigula aleinu elyona. Sorry, before God's light, His extreme light, the awesome light of God, will be revealed upon us through His geula, His redemption. Ushlema, sorry, the complete redemption. Also, biyachas lichnisat makom mikdash. Until we start having a redemptive process over here, it's too early. There's a lot to unpack over here. One, this is similar to, by the way, an idea that the Jewish people turned to a very well not understood midrash that has been discussed many times before. Midrash is basically, on its surface, says Jewish people are not supposed to go back to the land of Israel before Messianic times, was used as cover. Of course, it was never halacha, but it was used as cover to protect the Jewish people when they were weak. And I guess the conquerors of the land of Israel, foreigners, whether it be the Ottomans or the Crusaders, the Persians, whoever it may be, thought that the early Muslim conquerors also, when they thought, hey, the Jews are now going to start competing with us, they want to forcefully take control of our conquests or our territory. They would say, no, 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 we have no such plans. We're not supposed to do such a thing. That was used many times as cover. So too, Rav Kook is saying we're not in a situation where we could say, even though all Jews, of course, want this, if someone asks you tomorrow, and we've talked about this also, someone asks you tomorrow, do you want the temple to be rebuilt on the Temple Mount? And you say, well, 100% yes, that's what I'm praying for. But some say, no, 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 we don't want to offend those Muslims. Say, no, that's like fairy tale Judaism. We have no intention. And then, of course, we discussed just a few months ago the rabbis who said such a thing. And then you ask them, okay, so what are you going to do if the Messiah shows up tomorrow? You're going to tell those Gentiles, oh yeah, all those times I said we had no intention to take over the Temple Mount. Yeah, well, now it is because Messiah showed up, so now we are against it. Rav Kook was saying he was playing the long game. He's waiting for a redemption to start, and then we'll be able to talk about this. By the way, Rav Kook was looking forward to what? The founding of, let's say, a state, a Jewish state. And then once you have a Jewish state that's actually powerful, and a lot of Jews, let's say, whatever started in 1967, maybe Rav Kook would have said differently. Like now the redemption is already unfolding. It's actually, like his son said, we're just drowning in redemption. When Rav Kook's times, the first Rav Kook, the water was rising, and it could be up to your knees in redemption. Now it's just overflowing us. Oh boy. And that's also what I explained to the investigative committee over here. That is the mandatory authorities. The British were trying to hold on to mandatory Palestine. They just became the rulers, 1917? They're setting up the place. It had been ruled by the Ottomans for hundreds of years. And they didn't want the Jewish people to start saying, okay, now we're going to have a fight over this place. So they investigated Rav Kook. They brought him before whatever, I don't know what they call their committee in English, but Rav Kook was meant to testify there and say, of course, we're loyal citizens of the British Empire, or loyal subjects of His Majesty. Thank God he's not in charge here anymore. So, that was a problem. Alkain Divrei, your words over here. This means the guy who's writing to him. That's an honorific over here. Hold on a second. Heim nichbadim biachas lidrosh. It's nice that you're talking about this. Yeah, it's Torah. Let's talk about theory so we could get credit for discussing words of Torah. God forbid that we should actually begin to think we're going to start actually doing something. Okay, so yeah, Rav Kook was basically saying over here in his nice way. He mentions even the word polity over here. Okay, there's the word right there. The danger, political danger, and the British people investigating him. Rav Kook is not giving a halachic argument over here. Rav Kook is talking about the political situation and the dangerous situation, by the way, as it existed in the 1920s before, for example, there was a palmach. So let's get back to this. In short, if someone's going to ask you, well, will Rav Kook prohibit going to the Temple Mount? The first answer is, I do not know what Rav Kook's actual halachic opinion on this was. And it is hard to say that someone so familiar with all the sources would say in any serious manner that from a Talmudic standpoint, a halachic standpoint, there is a problem. More than that, he'd probably say, there's a mitzvah. Rav Kook had so much problems. They gave him so much tsaris by trying to find advantages and describing, for example, why Jewish people should begin to exercise or maybe even have paramilitary training. Rav Kook saw, for example, and Rav Naor has written much about this. Rav Kook saw that perhaps the Jewish people learning to fight is also part of the redemptive process. And for that, he took so much flack. And all these other ideas, they gave him so much hassle. They shortened his life with all these controversies they brought up because they didn't understand his extremely nuanced and perhaps deep and almost prophetic understanding of what was going on around him. That when he says, we're just not going to talk about this right now and hold on for a little bit and let the redemption start. And then once we have a little bit more power, we'll be able to talk about this. To say 100 years later, it's been 100 years since he wrote this, 100 years later, that the Jewish people on top, and they've been on top for many decades, to now hold back for whatever reason is ridiculous. It's the opposite of everything Rav Kook stood for. Rav Kook was the most advanced, progressive in a good way, not a communist leftist way. Rav Kook was the most progressive rabbi of the last few hundred years who saw ahead. We have to move. Am Yisrael has been hibernating and not doing Am Yisrael things. Am Yisrael exists as individuals and communities in the Gullus, and Am Yisrael has to wake up as a nation. He was trying to wake them up in the sense, realized, for example, the secular Zionists were onto something that had basically skipped the religious Jews and trying to show to the religious Jews that nationalism and other related issues are part and parcel of living the halacha. To go and say that Rav Kook would say, no, like mainstream so-called religious Zionist community here in Israel and America, they're all focusing on the achievements of 48 and 67, but they're not looking ahead. They were one time, they were the rebels. They're the ones I said about Rabbi Soloveitchik. That was one time he was the one who was looking ahead. The Joseph dreamt a dream, and they've been stuck. They've been stuck since 1967. They don't want to. The establishment types go ahead with anything else. Rav Kook would not have been with that. I would think that if you study Rav Kook well enough, and Rav Kook was now here today, he would be of course, one of the major candidates for to be the high priest, but also he'd be one of the major advocates in trying to show us how we can go about rebuilding the temple and what its esoteric meanings today are. But whatever, that's if you just focus, Rav Kook said it's usher, then it's usher, and that's certainly not the way a Talmud Chacham should be thinking. So wish everybody good Shabbos or a good week, depending on when you're viewing this, and shalom v'nitzachon. Be well.